Lucy Wilson and you're watching E-News. Let's take a look at today's top stories. A second round of peace talks between Russia and Ukraine have begun in Abu Dhabi. The US says it shot down an Iranian drone flying towards its aircraft carrier. President Aliyev and Prime Minister Pashinyan received the Zayed Award in Abu Dhabi for progress in peace. Thanks for joining us. A second round of US brokered peace talks between Russia and Ukraine has begun in the UAE capital, Abu Dhabi. Ukraine's chief negotiator said negotiations are taking place under direct instructions from President Zelensky, and the Ukrainian delegation is briefing the president at every stage of the process. The talks follow an initial round of consultations held in Abu Dhabi in late January. Washington's delegation includes US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, who arrived earlier today. Well, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said Russian troops will continue fighting in Ukraine until Kyiv makes decisions that could bring the war to an end. He said Moscow's position remains unchanged and is known to both Ukrainian and US negotiators. The comments come as a new round of peace talks began in Abu Dhabi.
Russia continues its special military operation. The door to a peaceful settlement is open. Russia maintains its openness. Our position is crystal clear, well understood by both the Kyiv regime and the American negotiators, who are providing their good services in conducting these trilateral negotiations, and to whom we are grateful for their efforts. But until the Kyiv regime makes the appropriate decisions, the special military operation continues. Our troops are striking targets they believe are associated with the Kyiv regime's military complex, and the operation continues.
Well, Russia launched its most powerful attack this year on Ukraine's battered energy facilities, killing 2 people. Ukraine's president said the strikes violated Russia's agreement with Trump to hold off from attacking its energy systems during a freezing winter.
At least 2 people have been killed as Russia launched its largest air attack of the year on Ukraine's energy infrastructure overnight, according to authorities. President Volodymyr Zelensky says there were a record number of ballistic missiles and drones that were fired. Power plants and critical infrastructure in Kyiv and several other regions were hit as temperatures fell to -20 degrees Celsius. Ukraine's largest private energy company, DTEK, described the assault as the most powerful blow to the energy sector this year. More than 1,000 apartment buildings in the capital were left without heating, while a thermal power plant in the eastern city of Kharkiv was damaged beyond repair. There was no immediate comment from Moscow. President Zelensky accused Russia of choosing escalation over diplomacy, saying Moscow had used a brief pause in attacks to stockpile weapons and prepare for renewed strikes.
The war must be stopped. But if the world, America and Europe do not have the power to stop Russian strikes, then who will believe there is the power to guarantee that the war will not reignite again? Pressure is needed so that Russia has motivation to invest in diplomacy rather than a war of destruction.
NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte, speaking during a visit to Kyiv, condemned the attack and urged alliance members to increase air defense support for Ukraine.
And that is an attack, again, on innocent civilians, on civilian infrastructure, which I think is unacceptable. And this has nothing to do with winning a war or fighting a war, which, as I said, in itself was unprovoked, starting on the 24th of February 2022. But this is creating chaos.
The attack comes days after a US-backed energy ceasefire expired and comes ahead of another round of US-coordinated talks between Ukrainian and Russian negotiators in Abu Dhabi later this week.
To other news now, and President Trump says the US is negotiating with Iran on a new nuclear deal. The confirmation comes after an Iranian drone was shot down near the Abraham Lincoln carrier. It's ahead of Friday's talks, which will now be held in Oman, and not Turkey is first agreed.
US President Donald Trump said that the United States is currently negotiating with Iran. The announcement came after Tehran requested that planned talks be held in Oman rather than Turkey.
Are they negotiating from Iran? Roll over, but they are negotiating. They'd like to do something, and we'll see if something is going to be done. They had a chance to do something a while ago, and it didn't work out, and we did Midnight Hammer. I don't think they want that happening again, but they would like to negotiate. We are negotiating with them right now, yes.
Mr. President.
Where will the meeting be? It seems like it's
can't tell
changing.
you that. Mr. President. There's more than one meeting. Yeah, please.
Earlier on Tuesday, the US military said it shot down an Iranian Shahed 139 drone approaching the Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier in the Arabian Sea. Navy Captain Tim Hawkins said the drone was destroyed by an F-35 fighter jet in self-defense, with no American personnel or equipment harmed. In a separate incident in the Strait of Hormuz, Iran's Revolutionary Guard harassed a US-flagged merchant vessel, but authorities say the situation was defused with the escort of a US Navy ship. Meanwhile, US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff visited Israel to discuss nuclear talks with Iran and the next phase of the Gaza ceasefire plan, ahead of Friday's planned meeting with Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. Saudi and Egyptian officials are also expected to attend. Trump linked the diplomatic efforts to the US military presence in the area, warning, "We have ships heading to Iran. If we can work something out, that would be great, and if we can't, probably bad things would happen." Iranian officials insist that sanctions relief must be part of any deal. Regional mediators, including Turkey, have urged de-escalation. Experts say Friday's talks could provide a crucial opportunity to ease tensions between Washington and Tehran.
Thousands of documents related to the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein have been removed from the US Department of Justice's website. It's after victims and their lawyers warned that sensitive personal details had been made public. They said the disclosure placed dozens of survivors at risk and was causing distress.
The US Department of Justice says it's taken down all flagged documents after victims said their identities had been compromised in the release of the Epstein files. Thousands of documents have been removed from its website. Lawyers for the victims of the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein said email addresses and nude images were included, which could allow some victims to be identified. They say it's disrupted the lives of nearly 100 survivors. In a statement, they described the disclosure as outrageous and said they should not be named, scrutinized, or re-traumatized. The Justice Department said it blames technical or human error and added that it is reviewing further requests and checking whether more documents need redaction. Asked about transparency, US President Donald Trump said some victims were unhappy with the released material and argued that the country should move on to other issues.
Do you think that they should be more transparent?
The fact that they thought they released too much. I heard that, and you tell me something else. No, I think it's really time for the country to get onto something else. Really, now that nothing came out about me, other than it was a conspiracy against me, literally by Epstein and other people. But I think it's time now for the country to maybe get onto something else.
What would you say to people
like
who feel like they haven't gotten
healthcare,
justice, Mr. President?
something that people care about?
Millions of Epstein-related files have been released since a law mandated their disclosure last year, including millions of pages, images, and videos published on Friday. The release came 6 weeks after the Justice Department missed a legal deadline set by a law signed by President Trump, following bipartisan pressure in Congress.
Well, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, formerly known as Prince Andrew, has reportedly been relocated from his Windsor home. The move comes amid renewed scrutiny over his ties to Jeffrey Epstein.
Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, the brother of King Charles, has reportedly moved out of Royal Lodge in Windsor following damaging new revelations about his links to Jeffrey Epstein. British media say Andrew left the Soteroom mansion, where he has lived for more than 20 years, and has been relocated to a cottage on the King's Sandringham estate in Norfolk. It had also emerged that ex-prince was paying what is known as a peppercorn rent at Royal Lodge, a legal term meaning the rent is only nominal, often as little as £1 a year, in order to keep a lease technically valid. The move comes as police assess a claim that a woman was sent by Epstein to Andrew at Royal Lodge in 2010. A Thames Valley police spokesperson said officers are aware of reports that a woman may have been taken to an address in Windsor that year as part of human trafficking. Police have not announced any formal investigation, saying the information is being assessed. Andrew has not commented on the latest allegation, but has previously denied any wrongdoing related to Epstein. In previous statements, Buckingham Palace has said the King's sympathy is with victims of abuse. Andrew stepped back from public duties in 2019 after his friendship with Epstein became the focus of intense public attention. The latest claim is now being reviewed by police. Zainab Farizadeh, A-News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
President Trump signed a major funding bill on Tuesday, ending a partial government shutdown that began on Saturday. The package was approved by the Senate on Friday and later passed by the House of Representatives. The legislation will fund most US government departments until the end of the financial year, including defense, education and healthcare. Funding for the Department of Homeland Security, however, has been extended only until next week. Last year's shutdown lasted 43 days, furloughing hundreds of thousands of workers and costing the US economy around $11 billion. The US brokered ceasefire is taking effect in northeastern Syria. Syrian government forces have now moved into the Kurdish-controlled cities of Hasakah and Qamishli under the agreement.
Syrian government security forces have entered the northeastern Kurdish-controlled cities of Hasakah and Qamishli, implementing the first phase of a US-brokered ceasefire agreement. The deployment comes after weeks of conflict in which the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, the SDF, lost large areas of territory to Damascus. A convoy of military trucks entered Hasakah on Monday and then in Qamishli on Tuesday as the SDF imposed temporary curfews. The agreement, announced last Friday, aims to integrate Kurdish fighters into Syria's national army and police while bringing civilian institutions under central government control. Under the terms of the deal, government forces are to avoid Kurdish-majority neighborhoods. Those small interior ministry units will take over state facilities such as civil registries, passport offices and airports. Kurdish local police will continue security operations in both cities before gradually merging with government forces. US officials have praised the agreement as an historic step toward national unity and reconciliation after more than 14 years of civil war. The SDF, once a key US ally against Islamic State, has seen its influence wane as Damascus reasserts control over Syria's northeast.
Now, who will be chosen to lead the United Nations next? The race for the Secretary-General's position has formally begun. Let's take a look at who's in the running.
The United Nations is set to choose a new Secretary-General later this year, with the 5-year term beginning on January 1st, 2027, as Antonio Guterres prepares to step down. Although the role traditionally rotates among regions, diplomats say Latin America is widely seen as next in line, even as candidates from other regions remain possible. The selection process formally began in November 2025, when the presidents of the Security Council and General Assembly invited member states to submit nominations. Governments have until April 1st to put forward candidates, who will then take part in public interactive dialogues later that month to present their vision for the UN. 3 Latin American figures have so far emerged as leading contenders. Former Chilean president and ex-UN human rights chief Michelle Bachelet, Rafael Grossi of Argentina, currently head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, and Costa Rica's Rebecca Greenspan, the Secretary General of the UN Conference on Trade and Development. The Security Council will narrow the field through a series of closed-door straw polls, a process that requires the backing of all 5 permanent members, the United States, Russia, China, Britain and France. The General Assembly then votes on the final candidate, a step typically seen as a formality. Often described as part diplomat, part administrator, the UN Secretary-General oversees thousands of staff, multi-billion-dollar budgets and peacekeeping missions around the world. While the position carries limited formal power, the Secretary-General remains the UN's most influential global voice during times of crisis.
Web Summit Qatar is coming to an end in Doha, concluding a 4-day gathering focused on technology, investment and global policy. The event has drawn wide international participation and featured a number of significant announcements. Guy Sean reports from Doha.
Web Summit Qatar 2026 then is drawing to a close here in Doha. It's been the biggest edition of this tech conference ever. The famous 4-day event, well, it's brought together over 30,000 delegates, more than 1,600 startups and hundreds of investors and political heavyweights too from around the world, all underscoring the growing role of this GCC region when it comes to innovation and entrepreneurship. And it's not all been talk. There've been some major decisions and strong statements made by world leaders. Qatar's Prime Minister announced a major expansion of the country's venture capital program, increasing its fund of fund vehicle to $3 billion. Or social media mega brand Snap, they've showcased fresh developments in AI and augmented reality. And geopolitics too has not been out of the spotlight. We heard in Monday's exclusive interview with A News that Yanis Varoufakis has been attacking the EU for poisoning its own democracy, and he's predicting a long period of decline for the Brussels-based bloc. Now, that interview, of course, is well worth checking out on anews.tv. But as the lights go down here behind me on this year's event, it's clear that the sold-out summit here in Qatar has illuminated the country's ambition to extend its role as a guiding light for both technology and diplomacy. Guy Schoen for A News in Doha.
Now, after the break, we'll take a look at the major stories from the region. Welcome back to A News. Now, let's take a closer look at the key stories shaping the region. Today in Abu Dhabi, Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev and Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan have been jointly awarded the Zayed Award for advancing peace between the two countries, promoting cooperation and contributing to regional stability. Let's take a look.
President Ilham Aliyev and Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has been awarded with the International Zayed Award for Human Fraternity 2026 for the peace agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia. This marks the first time the International Committee has honoured winners from the Caucasus. Both leaders mentioned the importance of the peace agreement which was signed between the two countries on August 8, 2025 in the United States. In his speech, President Aliyev said that Azerbaijan never lived in peace since it became independent, and that it is 6 months already since the historical summit in Washington hosted by US President Donald Trump. This peace continues.
I think that our example should be learned and taken as a roadmap for those who are still at war. Our example demonstrates that peace is possible despite long-lasting conflict, despite sufferings, and despite mutual untrust. Peace is possible when there is a strong political will from both sides and when this process is supported by friendly countries and by international community.
In his turn, Prime Minister Pashinyan said that the willingness of Azerbaijani and Armenian people to embrace a new future truly makes the historic moment possible. and that now it is time to focus on creating a peaceful and prosperous future for our nations.
But this ceremony is not only a celebration of the peace deal, it is also a confirmation by both Armenia and Azerbaijan that the page of the conflict is turned. Otherwise, it would be meaningless for the president of Azerbaijan or for me to come here and accept this honor. This is also an act of support by the international community because the decision was made by the judging committee with highly respectable member list from all around the world.
The Secretary-General of the Zayed Award, Mohammed Abdul Salam, said the agreement ends decades of conflict in the Caucasus and lays a strong foundation for a safer, shared future for both peoples. The International Zayed Award for Human Fraternity 2026 has been also awarded to Afghan education advocate Zaka Yaftali. The award honours people and organisations that promote peace and unity, inspired by a 2019 agreement signed by Pope Francis and Ahmed Al-Tayeb. Since its establishment, the award has honoured 19 recipients from 19 countries.
Sticking with the Zayed Award for Human Fraternity for now, world leaders and humanitarian experts gathered, highlighting efforts to foster peace and cooperation across the world.
The third International Zayed Award for Human Fraternity Majlis took place at the newly inaugurated Zayed National Museum in Abu Dhabi on Tuesday. The gathering brought together world leaders, peace builders and humanitarian experts to discuss global challenges and promote coexistence, compassion and solidarity. For the first time, the Majlis was hosted at the Zayed National Museum, a landmark celebrating the life and legacy of the UAE's founding father, the late Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan. Before the panel sessions, Saida Mirziyoyeva, head of the administration of the President of Uzbekistan and member of the Zayed Award Judging Committee, opened the event with remarks on behalf of this year's panel of judges. The first panel, titled Female Leadership at the Heart of Human Fraternity, highlighted the role of women in strengthening social cohesion and humanitarian values. Vice President of the Heydar Aliyev Foundation, Leyla Aliyeva, was among the panellists. Speaking at the session, she said that respect for different cultures, religions and traditions has always been an integral part of life in Azerbaijan. The Zayed Award for Human Fraternity remains an independent initiative celebrating individuals and institutions that champion solidarity, integrity and humanity across borders.
Rail cargo movement across the South Caucasus is supporting regional connectivity with a fresh consignment of Russian grain reaching Armenia via Azerbaijan. Our correspondent Dilek Tuna has more.
Today, 8 rail wagons loaded with grain was sent from Russia to Armenia, transiting through Azerbaijan. The latest shipment adds to the steadily increasing volume of grain moved along this route. To date, a total of 285 rail wagons carrying nearly 20,000 tonnes of grain have been transported from Russia to Armenia through Azerbaijani territory without disruption. The development follows President Ilham Aliyev's October 2025 decision to lift transit restrictions on goods bound for Armenia. These restrictions had been in place during the period of Armenian occupation of Azerbaijani territory. Since their removal, both direct and transit rail deliveries along the route have proceeded smoothly. In parallel with the grain shipments, Azerbaijan state oil company Sokat has delivered several rail consignments of fuel, including petrol and diesel, to Armenia in recent weeks. Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has stated that diesel prices in the country have declined following the establishment of peace with Azerbaijan. Dilek Tuna and Ilkin Mehtiev, A News.
Armenia's Justice Minister says the text of the country's new constitution will be ready within the next 6 months. That's according to Armenian media. The minister said the final stage of the work is scheduled for March. She stressed that by then the full draft will be completed and made public, adding that finalising the new constitution remains one of the ministry's top priorities. Georgia's ruling party has pushed through one of its most far-reaching legislative initiatives to date, a package of laws that reshapes the rules on grants, political activity and foreign funding. Supporters call it a matter of sovereignty. However, critics warn it marks a decisive turn away from democracy. Our correspondent Nini Nikolaishvili reports from Tbilisi.
With 82 votes in favor and just 10 against, Georgia's parliament has taken a decisive step towards tightening state control over politics, funding and civic space. In a first reading, lawmakers approved a sweeping legislative package introduced by the ruling Georgian Dream faction. The changes span multiple laws, including the law on grants, the criminal code, election and party financing regulations, and introduce new restrictions, prohibitions and criminal sanctions. At the core of the package is a redefinition of what constitutes a grant. Under the amendments, virtually any financial or in-kind support, including expertise, services, or technical assistance that could influence political or public processes, would require prior government approval. Receiving such funding without consent could result in heavy fines, community service, or even prison sentences of up to 6 years. Political parties and their leaders face criminal liability for accepting foreign funding. External lobbying is also criminalized. New rules restrict party membership for individuals employed by organizations receiving significant foreign income, while the State Audit Office gains expanded oversight powers. The ruling party says the goal is to protect Georgia's sovereignty from foreign influence. However, opponents argue that the laws give the government unprecedented leverage over civil society, political opponents, media, and activists. The reaction from Brussels has been sharp. I cannot support a government that acts against its own people, said EU Commissioner for Enlargement, Marta Kos, warning that Georgia is moving farther away from its European future and calling on the government to stop this absurdity. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas said that the bloc expects to take steps in response, stressing that freedom of the press and fundamental rights are at stake. Inside Georgia, demonstrators, opposition parties and civil society groups say that the legislation brings the country closer than ever to autocracy and farther from the European path endorsed by voters. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A-News.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has met with his Egyptian counterpart in Cairo during a state visit. The two leaders also presided over the second meeting of the Turkey-Egypt Strategic Cooperation Council. Our correspondent in Istanbul brings us more.
On Wednesday, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan visited Cairo at the head of a high-level delegation where he held talks with Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. Details of the closed-door discussions were not immediately available. However, the two leaders were widely expected to focus on the Gaza Strip, which borders Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. At a joint press conference, Erdogan praised the close bilateral ties between the two countries, particularly in the fields of trade, investment, and tourism. He said the Palestinian issue topped the agenda of talks with el-Sisi, along with recent developments related to Syria, Somalia, and Iran. El-Sisi, for his part, voiced Egypt's readiness to work closely with Turkey to help resolve regional crises. The two leaders also presided over the second meeting of the Turkey-Egypt High-Level Strategic Cooperation Council, which was established in 2024. After the 2011 Arab Spring uprisings, relations between Turkey and Egypt were strained for more than a decade. Ties were fully restored in 2023, with Erdogan and el-Sisi visiting each other's countries the following year. Since then, relations have deepened, particularly in the defense sector, with Turkey supplying Egypt's military with advanced Turkish-built combat drones. Erdogan's visit to Cairo came a day after his trip to Riyadh, where he held talks with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. During that visit, the two sides issued a joint declaration pledging to step up cooperation and align their positions on key regional conflicts. They also signed a landmark agreement under which Riyadh will invest $2 billion in wind and solar energy projects in Turkey. Oytun Orhan, an expert at Ankara's Center for Middle Eastern Studies, said this week's twin visits may signal the beginning of a regional alliance between Turkey, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. Speaking to A News, Orhan said the three countries could form a common security axis and coordinate more closely on regional hotspots, including Palestine, Syria, Sudan, Yemen, and Libya. This is Adam Maro for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Following a wave of assaults by Pakistan's separatist Baloch Liberation Army, the country's forces have launched a hunt for the militias. Officials say the latest attacks by the BLA in Balochistan province killed more than 50 security personnel and civilians.
Pakistan's military is pursuing separatist militants following coordinated attacks in the southwestern province of Balochistan that killed more than 50 security personnel and civilians. A wave of assaults by the separatist Baloch Liberation Army on Saturday brought the country's largest province to a near standstill as security forces exchanged fire with militants at over a dozen locations. Officials reported that at least 197 militants were killed during the clashes. Analysts warn the conflict has reached a strategic deadlock, fueling cycles of extreme violence.
If you look at the insurgency in Balochistan, it is deadlocked on the battlefield, which means that both sides, the insurgent side and the military, are not in a position to impose a military solution on the other. And the longer this deadlock persists without a political recourse, you will see more extreme forms of violence, like the one we saw the other day when a multiple coordinated attack was launched in 12 districts of Balochistan.
Pakistan's government has long accused India of backing the BLA, a claim New Delhi again rejected, saying Islamabad should address the long-standing demands of its people. The allegations have further strained relations between the nuclear-armed neighbours. The banned BLA said the attacks, part of an operation dubbed Black Storm, targeted security forces. Balochistan, Pakistan's largest and poorest province, has been affected for decades by an insurgency in which separatists demand greater autonomy and control over the region's mineral resources.
Pakistan and Kazakhstan have signed more than 30 agreements across areas ranging from trade to healthcare as Kazakhstan's president wraps up his first state visit to Pakistan in 23 years. Our correspondent Hira Mustafa reports from Islamabad.
Kazakhstan President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev arrived in Pakistan on Tuesday, landing at Nur Khan Air Base, where he was warmly received by Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and President Asif Ali Zardari. During his visit, the two countries on Wednesday announced they had signed over 30 MOUs covering trade, economy, health, agriculture, climate, science and technology, artificial intelligence, rail connectivity and media collaboration. In recognition of his efforts to strengthen bilateral ties between the two countries, Tokayev was awarded Pakistan's highest civilian honour, the Nishan-e-Pakistan. Pakistan's Prime Minister, while addressing the MOU signing ceremony, said Pakistan aims to increase bilateral trade from $250 million to $1 billion within a year and will work closely with Kazakh authorities to implement the signed agreement swiftly. The leaders described the strategic partnership as a historic milestone. They discussed the Pakistan-Afghanistan-Russia-Kazakhstan transport corridor to boost regional connectivity and unveiled the commemorating plaque of Kazakhstan-Pakistan Sports Center, Dostek, aimed at promoting cooperation in sports. President Tokayev described Pakistan as a reliable and important partner in South Asia, highlighting shared values and traditions. He also expressed interest in strengthening collaboration in agriculture and medical products and urged business communities from both countries to deepen economic ties. He said that Prime Minister Sharif is expected to visit Kazakhstan later this year to further cement the partnership. Hira Mustafa, A News, Islamabad.
Central Asia and the United States are discussing ways to deepen economic cooperation. Business leaders and government officials have gathered in Bishkek for the B5+1 International Business Forum, where investment, transport connectivity and private sector engagement are high on the agenda. Our correspondent is following the discussions on the ground.
The B5+1 International Business Forum is underway here with participants from Central Asia and the United States. The keynote speaker is Sergio Gore, the U.S. Special Envoy for South and Central Asia. Addressing the forum, Gore said the Trump Route for International Peace and Prosperity project would link Central Asia and the South Caucasus with Western markets, strengthening regional connectivity. He added that Central Asia has returned to the U.S. foreign economic agenda under President Donald Trump with cooperation led by the private sector.
For too long, the United States did not pay attention to this area. Under President Trump's leadership, that is something we aim to change. As everyone witnessed when we had the C5+1 visit last year at the White House, the importance comes from the Oval Office. And that's something that we want to focus on. That's something we want to build upon. This is something that is mutually beneficial. We have the best technology, we have the best abilities, and that's something that we want to work together with those countries and the partners in this region.
Among the key areas of cooperation between the region and the United States are e-commerce, artificial intelligence, critical minerals, agriculture, and the development of transport infrastructure. Proposals developed within the B5+1 platform focus on reducing administrative barriers, expanding financial tools for small and medium-sized businesses, and accelerating the digitalization of public services. And experts say the region still faces significant challenges.
One of the most common challenges that we hear from the U.S. investors and other international investors is really that while Central Asian market is very interesting, very attractive, it's a fragmented market. Each country has their own set of standards and regulations, and if businesses want to grow beyond one country, they have to face a completely new regime of new standards and new regulations, and it makes business very, very difficult or costly. Harmonizing the standards and systems across the region will be really helpful to attract more U.S. investors and other investors to the region.
Against this backdrop, governments in the region are calling for more practical cooperation. Addressing the forum, First Deputy Chairman of the Cabinet of Ministers of Kyrgyzstan, Danyar Amangaldiyev, urged American businesses to turn dialogue into concrete action and build sustainable and profitable partnerships. He noted that Central Asia, with a consumer market of 80 million people and a young population, is increasingly emerging as a strategic hub for global trade and logistics. Fariza Kalimurzina, Bishkek, A-News.
The United Nations Security Council is preparing to vote later this month on whether to extend the mandate of the monitoring team that supports the Afghanistan sanctions regime. If approved, the decision would keep existing UN sanctions on Taliban-linked individuals and entities in place, including travel bans, asset freezes and an arms embargo. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has the details from Kabul.
The mandate of the monitoring team that supports the Afghanistan 1988 Sanctions Committee is due to expire on February 17. Security Council members are expected to vote before that deadline on whether to extend the mandate, which plays a key role in overseeing the implementation of sanctions related to Afghanistan. If renewed, the existing sanctions regime would continue without change. These measures target individuals and entities associated with the Taliban. The sanctions include travel bans, assets freezes, and an arms embargo. A humanitarian exemption approved in late 2021 remains the only significant adjustment made to the regime since the Taliban returned to power. Diplomats say discussions on the mandate have focused on ongoing concerns about security, governance, and human rights in Afghanistan. The monitoring team also provides support to the UN Sanctions Committee overseeing ISIS and Al-Qaeda. That mandate, under a separate Security Council resolution adopted last year, runs until June 2027. The outcome of this month's vote will determine whether Afghanistan monitoring team continues its work for another year. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
We'll take a short break now, and right after the break we will talk more about the Zayed Award and what it means for the region. See you shortly. Welcome back to A News. Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan and Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev have been jointly awarded the Zayed Award in Abu Dhabi for advancing peace between the two countries, promoting cooperation and contributing to regional stability. Joining us now to discuss this is Member of Azerbaijan's Parliament, Gaya Mammadov. Thank you for being with us. Now, as we mentioned, President Aliyev and Prime Minister Pashinyan are being jointly recognised with this award. How significant is that?
Good evening. It is indeed a historic moment both for Azerbaijan and Armenia as independent nation states, because both countries find themselves for the first time in peaceful relationship, in peaceful coexistence with each other. A real opportunity for the people to live in peace and in dignity. Zayed Award is about the human fraternity. I believe that what two countries have achieved, leaders of two countries have achieved, indeed deserves to be recognized and acknowledged by such a authoritative award such as Zayed Award. There were decades of conflict between the two nations, and overcoming of which required immense efforts. Finally, we have been able to achieve peace between these two countries. Actually, here I think we need to give credit to our president, Mr. Ilham Aliyev, because it was him who made a decision to stop when Azerbaijan and finally restored its territorial integrity and sovereignty. And actually leadership is tested when not in absence of power, but when you have it in abundance. In that sense, President Ilham Aliyev's decision to stop at the border and to seek to resolve outstanding issues by the means of dialogue is actually is historic and must be commended.
And let's go back to something you mentioned earlier. You mentioned that this is the first time that these two countries have been at peace whilst they've been independent states. What does that look like on the ground? What could that lead to?
Well, first of all, we are going to find it out, how it's going to look like. But the few but important steps that have been taken so far by enabling a direct trade relationship between the two countries and enabling some important transit to Armenia are already very much encouraging. It shows that we should not, of course, forget the history, but we should not let the history determine our future. Our future lies in peaceful coexistence and close cooperation between the two nations.
And this is, of course, not just a single act, but it's a journey. That is what the committee said in regards to this peace process. What do you make of that comment, and what could potentially be the barriers that we might experience in the future?
Certainly, achieving full-fledged and lasting peace is not an easy task to achieve. To begin with, we have been in conflict situation for over 3 decades. But as long as we have political will and mutual understanding, I think we will be able to overcome all those challenges. It is natural that there are going to be some setbacks, ups and downs. It is not natural in every process, especially in such a complicated process as establishing lasting peace. but I am very much confident that we will be able to overcome these difficulties. One and very important issue, which is outstanding, I mean, a very practical issue, is about the enabling unimpeded transit through Armenian territory between the two parts of Azerbaijan, namely between Azerbaijan's western regions and its Nakhchivan Autonomous Republic. It is something that we have inherited from the past, but it is very much a complicated issue. But those areas should not be areas that divides us, but those should be the venues for cooperation and interconnectivity between the two nations.
In looking slightly beyond Azerbaijan, what about the reopening of the Turkish-Armenian border? In your view, could this award gain momentum towards that happening?
Well, I mean, award is something that has been accorded to the achievements that have been accomplished already. Of course, it's very much good encouragement for further steps. But when it comes to the Turkish-Armenian border issue, I mean, we all know that both Azerbaijan and Turkish governments have repeatedly expressed that this reopening of borders in the region will happen in close synchronization and close coordination between the two countries. But I'm optimistic since we are talking about the direct relationship between Azerbaijan and Armenia, but I think it will lead to the further positive steps in the region.
And what do those next steps look like? Obviously, Armenia will have elections in June. Do you think that could have an impact on the process?
The elections in Armenia are very important to us, but as a matter of principle, we should not make comments on it because it is Armenia's domestic issue. And we have, of course, our own assumptions, our own analysis, what is good, what is bad for the peace process. But I think we should focus on the substance. What steps needs to be done? Well, I think both countries need to respecting each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty, and not allow any kind of steps that might reignite the conflict. And one specific issue is about the removing territorial claims from our Armenia's constitutions. How Armenian people of Armenia are going to achieve this, it is their business, of course, but we are going to, of course, follow closely what's going to happen in Armenia in June.
And obviously this isn't the first time that Aliyev and Pashinyan have met in Abu Dhabi. Could you talk me through the role in the peace process of some external countries such as the UAE and such as the US as well?
Certainly, the key line of communication in achieving the lasting peace is bilateral one. But on top of this, we of course value and highly appreciate any kind of impetus from third countries, be it the UAE or the United States, specifically President Trump himself. President Trump invested a lot of efforts in finalizing the peace deal between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Of course, his efforts, his achievements need to be recognized and appreciated. In general, while again stressing that the primary venue for peace process is bilateral one, we appreciate any positive encouragement, inputs from third parties very much.
Thank you very much for joining us and for providing your insights.
Thank you very much.
That's the news for this hour. Stay tuned to A News for more updates, and thank you for watching.